Good morning, everybody. This is Panama Bartholomew with the Building Decarbonization Coalition, and thank you for joining us for the sooner the better, the Building Electrification Technology Roadmap. We're very excited to have Cathy and Alexi from the New Buildings Institute join the BDC today to talk about this great project. Sorry, running a little late. When you're in a pandemic and the audio visual, the recording information, when all the technology is not working, society breaks down. So I appreciate your patience. The BDC is a coalition of utilities, manufacturers, local governments, the real estate community, and NGOs all working together to eliminate emissions from the built environment. And in 2019, we released a roadmap for California about how we're going to go about completely eliminating emissions for the built environment. And implicit in that was 5 major goals that we were going to have to achieve as a community in order to be able to reach this goal of total elimination of greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. And number 1 was really dramatically increasing awareness of building electrification and its benefits across the board from all stakeholders. Goal number 2 was ensuring that customers receive a good value proposition from electrification. So we don't want losers coming out of electrification. We want people to have better upfront experiences and better operating experiences. We need to make sure that the people that are actually building these buildings and the people that are installing these appliances have a higher value proposition from electrification than from fossil fuel installations and construction. Goal number 4 is really about making sure that the supply chain and the delivery agents are ready to go. So is the workforce trained? Are the technologies that we want, are they being produced and at a rate and at an availability that we need? Are they being stocked locally? And then number 5, are all of our policies aligned to support these other goals? And so are decarbonization policies aligned with our energy efficiency policies, with our building code policies, with our indoor air quality policies, with our housing policies, et cetera? We need to make sure those are aligned and we're all moving towards decarbonization in all of those. Otherwise, we see conflict between them, as we're seeing in California right now between some of our housing goals and some of our climate goals. If you click one more time, please, Ashley. And so this webinar series that we do once a month, sometimes more than once a month, is really getting to that first goal. You know, we do a lot of different activities under goal 1 about raising awareness for different types of folks, but this webinar series is our opportunity to really bring in some of the top thinkers and doers within the building decarbonization space to tell us about new projects, to tell us about what's happening in the field, to tell us about exciting things that are coming down the pike or are already here that we may not be aware of. And so we're really appreciative that you join us, spend an hour of your day joining us on these webinar series, and we have a fantastic one today. Next slide, please. We have one more this year coming up. It's the last one as part of our gas proceeding webinar. We're having weekly webinars on the California Public Utility Commission's long-term gas planning proceeding. As former commissioner Leanne Randolph and now Air Resources Board Chair Leanne Randolph described it. This is the proceeding where California is going to plan its exit from natural gas. And so our last webinar on this is going to be next week, 11 o'clock Pacific, and it's going to be about supporting gas workers in a just decarbonized future. And so how do we plan for supporting gas workers as we transition off of gas? What are lessons learned from other states? What are some principles we need to consider as we're going into this proceeding? So buildingdecarb.org/upcoming-events is a place where you can find all of our webinars, and we hope you join us for the last one of the year. Next slide, please. So just some logistics. Everyone's muted. Please ask your questions via the chat or questions and answers, and we'll ask speakers to answer them at the end of their remarks. We have 2 speakers. We'll hold questions all the way to the very end. I may call on some of you to ask your question if you're very long-winded in the question, but agree to be short-winded when you verbally ask it. This webinar is being recorded, so please act appropriately. And members of the coalition can access the recording on the website in our members-only portal. Next slide, please. And lots of other fantastic things about being a member of the coalition. And so if you'd like to join the coalition, if you're not already part of it, we would love to have you in the organization. And you get access to fantastic recordings and the PowerPoints from these presentations, as well as a ton of other benefits. So please feel free to go buildingdecarb.org to get information about membership. Next slide, please. And so there we go. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Cathy and Alexi. They both come to us from the New Buildings Institute. They've been working on this project called the Building Electrification Technology Roadmap. And it's a really exciting project, as they'll tell you about, because there's a real recognition that we're going to be needing better technology into the future than what we have right now. We have all the technology we need for building electrification to start here in 2020, 2021, but there's a recognition that in 2045, we're going to need to see an evolution of this technology, and it's better for all of us if we see that quicker. And so we're really excited that Cathy and Alexi have been working on this project, the Building Electrification Technology Roadmap, for about a year now. And we think it's going to be a really seminal piece of work to be able to start to advance the evolution of critical electrification technologies. And so with that, Cathy and Alexi, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. Oh, are you seeing my screen?
We are.
The PowerPoint or my picture?
Yep. Both. That's great.
We just want to see this. I had to unmute. So Alexi is going to introduce the Building Electrification Technology Roadmap that we both worked on. And thank you, Panama and Building Decarbonization Coalition, for hosting us and for being a partner on this project. We're excited to share it with you.
All right. Thank you, Cathy. So yeah, what we're going to do today, we're going to introduce this roadmap to you. We're going to give you give you an idea what went into it, how we came to these conclusions, what information is available in there, and we'll give as much of a summary as we can in the time we have, leaving time for Q&A and discussion, some of the key findings and the recommendations that we think are actionable pieces out of this roadmap. So I'd want to recognize the funders that made this work possible and the partners that have worked hard to achieve the outcomes we're going to talk about today. Several utilities in California, Southern California Edison, Pacific Gas and Electric, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Sacramento Municipal Utility District, and also EPRI and us at NBI have contributed funding. EPRI and BDC are project partners, and some of the other contributing authors are listed there. So thank you to all of you. We couldn't do it without you.
So with that, let me just give a background on what BETR is about and why we're doing it. I think this audience probably knows better than anyone regarding the reasons for building electrification, but the reasons for this particular roadmap are as follows: that it's designed and requested and directed to be for efficiency programs and program administrators. We all know the leverage historically over 40 years that the energy efficiency industry has had on the market as a transforming entity with both education, incentives, raising awareness, and so that's who requested this report, and it is designed speaking to them, but it'll also be very helpful for others to see. Its goal is to accelerate the adoption of advanced electric technologies that displace gas technologies. So when we talk about electrification technologies, it's a subset of technologies, certainly not all technologies that are electric, strictly those that displace existing incumbent gas technologies for the purpose of decarbonizing the built environment, because we have a lot of direct appliances in buildings, commercial and residential, that we'll share with you that can electrify and improve efficiency. So what the big picture is with BETR is threefold. Once we address what the technical status is of electrification technologies, so that we can know where are they at in terms of their readiness, where are they headed on the road to adoption, and how do we overcome barriers to adoption? So status, barriers, and recommendations. And a really critical point in today's technologies is that greening the grid, well, we're doing a fantastic job, particularly in California, with 35% already of the renewable portfolio standard met. It is not enough because how much energy you use and when you use it matters. So even if we were completely a green grid, if you imagine, we would still have fossil fuels being used directly in buildings, and we would still be having carbon impacts at the building level. So we have to green the buildings by electrifying them, and we have to control the use of that electricity to be in harmony and integrated with the renewable energy system. So that's a critical part of any electrification technologies, that can be controllable and in timed with the renewables. So the framework of the BETR is that we have two things we produced, recognizing that it was a deep technical study. So there's over an 80-page report that we're just finishing. I want to emphasize, and it says at the bottom here, that we're just delivering this to the funders at the end of the year. It's in production right now. I actually see a couple of these slides that need a little bit of tweaking as we finish our product. So we'll be delivering the full deep report, and it's got layers of information. Then we're also doing each end use, the 4 end uses of space heating, water heating, cooking, and laundry that use a predominant amount of gas technologies in existing buildings, have a deeper dive here, as you see on the right, and we talk about their impact and importance, their status, and the roadblocks and recommendations. Then an adjunct product we'll be doing, because we know our industry and our society, we have a roll-up product that's going to be more graphical. It's, instead of an executive summary, we have a 20-page kind of highlights that'll be accompany it, but it'll be an independent document. So that's what BETR is a deep technical document accompanied by a summary. And clearly this BETR is driven by those utilities' interests in electrification and the goals within the state of California. So on the left, you see, we know buildings, they are a predominant part of greenhouse gas emissions, both through their operational practices and through the electricity that they use at the site. But when you look at the whole California goals on the right, the goal for buildings is about 70% of buildings to be decarbonized, to meet a carbon neutrality goal of 2045. That's the state of California's target. And so when you look at that right now, in terms of the goal of buildings role, we have to do 30% of those buildings by 2030 at a minimum. There's more aggressive targets, and it would be good to accelerate that. And there's the 2045 goal. And you see in the gray bars, that's a significant amount of carbon reduction. This is not to do with the grid. This is just electrifying buildings, and we drop our carbon in the state by that much. But look at what's going on right now. This is the current penetration of fuels across site used appliances and technologies, just in residential, because that's the data that was most accessible. We have 82% of residential space heating served by natural gas and 86% of water heating. And then when you add propane as also a combustible fuel, we have a big job in front of us to accelerate the electric technologies that can displace those site combustion appliances. So the drivers, in closing this introduction, we clearly know the climate goals that I just reviewed are a huge one. Health and indoor air quality issues, both associated in the building with the combustion fuels and also adjacent to the production of electricity generation that's being done by natural gas through combined combustion turbines. Equity, burdens of energy production and costs, and Panama mentioned the equity of fossil fuel workers or the gas industry. We need an equitable transition to clean jobs as well. And lastly, I've added this, we usually see these 3 as the drivers, but it's also really compelling and interesting in California, particularly where you have a huge leadership in technology companies, that we want to have the most advanced technologies, the most efficient, the most grid integrated. These are the leading edge technologies that we're introducing, and that's the right direction for buildings. So now Alexi is going to speak on technologies. And did you want control, or do you want me to advance?
Why don't you give me keyboard and mouse and I'll advance this section.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Cathy. So I'm going to discuss, talk about the technologies that we studied and talk about what we did to determine where these technologies are at today so that we know what they need to do, to get to the end goals of decarbonization. talk about some of the methodology a little bit about how we get there from here. Here we are. So welcome to the matrix. The matrix is where, of course, as a data wonk, we put all our information in a big matrix spreadsheet kind of a tool. So I'll give you a quick overview of how we got this information, got it all into one place, and organized it for use here. Here we are. So we did a lot of research. We pulled together information from dozens of sources, put it all into this large spreadsheet, and produced a tool. Some of the technologies that we're talking about here, and I'll get into what that tool is in a moment, but the key technologies we're talking about here, they cover those 4 end uses that Cathy mentioned: space heating, water heating, cooking, and laundry, mainly clothes drying. We looked at technologies across new construction and also looking at retrofits to existing buildings, and we divided things into 5 main sectors: single-family residential, multifamily residential, small commercial, large commercial, and higher ed or institutional buildings. You can see on the right side there, those are the 38 technologies. I'm not going to list them by voice, but really it's a pretty comprehensive list of all these technologies that specifically and directly displace combustion of fossil fuels in buildings. So having put all those together, put them all into this matrix, build them out the other way by new or existing or single family or small commercial, right? You can imagine it sort of bifurcates and expands significantly. Ended up with 140 or 50 rows down of all these different flavors and combinations, and then we characterized where each technology is at and what its status is in some of these key parameters. So these are our 5 first priority parameters or primary parameters. We've got some secondary ones as well, but the key things we're looking at and talking about here are technology readiness. How ready is this technology? Can you put it in a building now, or is it going to be a few years? Availability here in this country. Can you go buy it? Can you get this thing off the shelf? Is it limited or is it not available yet? Ease of application, that's about site barriers or challenges in the building to getting this thing in. That might be things like wiring constraints in existing buildings or venting requirements. There's various different types of application barriers that may exist, so we did a rating there. Awareness, do people know about this product, this technology, both in terms of the market side and more on the industry side, upstream. And finally, very critically, what is the scale of greenhouse gas reductions we can expect to see from this electrification technology compared to other measures, other strategies? All of these are characterized on a 1 to 3. These are qualitative characterizations that informed. I'm going to go back up one, actually. Back up another. Here we go. You can see these are red, yellow, greens. So each cell of that huge matrix is characterized along those 5 parameters by 1, 2, or 3. How ready to go is it, or etc. Having put all that information into a big matrix, then we built a graphical tool that lets us dive into that information and figure out, okay, let's say for single family water heating, what are the technologies? How ready are they? What's the scale of their greenhouse gas reduction? So we have this filterable tool that we used as kind of an intermediate step to be able to dig into that very large data set and figure out what can we learn from this? What does this tell us? Having done that, we then pulled some information, kind of took a step back from staring at a very large matrix and are able to make these characterizations of these key technologies. And we've done that by end use. So what I'll show here, and we're going to show this for each of the 4 end uses here. I'll start with space heating. You can see on the right, this is a graphical summary of what's going on. The solid balls are high, or high score of 3. Halfway filled is a moderate or a 2, and the empty ones are a low or 1. There are a few cells with nothing there, which is to say not enough info, or true would be sort of a 0. Not even there yet. But in terms of space heating, this is the story of heat pumps, and fundamentally heat pumps are ready to go. There are lots of different types of space heating heat pump technologies, many products. You can do it in new construction, you can do it in retrofit, you can do it in every building type. So we've characterized several types of heat pumps. There are some differences, of course, and some products make more sense in one application than another. So that's discussed there. But the one key takeaway I want to share from the technology status on space heating is heat pumps are here, they're ready to go. There have been a lot of improvements in things like cold climate performance, and there are still improvements to be made in terms of refrigerants and in terms of cold climate performance in some applications, but basically they're ready to go. So expect to see more improvements out of heat pumps for space heating going forward, but I think there's already encouraging action on this front, and the products are for the most part, ready to go off the shelf. Cathy?
Great. Go ahead and advance to water heating. Thank you. Great. Yeah, water heating. Well, this is, MBI has been in a lot of hot water the last couple of years, and also with Building Decarbonization Coalition, and many of you through our work on the Advanced Water Heating Initiative. And in that initiative, we have learned a lot about heat pump water heaters. We're working to advance those very quickly. Water heating, along with space heating, are the lion's share of carbon impacts within buildings. In this graphic, you see that the unitary 240 volt heat pump water heater and central heat pump water heaters are in the left two columns, solid, filled, ready to go. Can go get them today, can install them. They don't have technical barriers, they don't have availability barriers. We would like to see more products in central heat pump water heaters. As you see below, the third row, the central heat pump water heater, low GWP, that stands for global warming potential. And we're very cognizant of the fact that when we talk about heat pumps, we are talking about technologies that have refrigerants. Refrigerants are greenhouse gas impacting factor, and in the BETR we talk about the trend for lower global warming potential or lower impacting refrigerants. So you have to look there to see that trend, but that's why we also characterize technologies differently when they have a lower GWP, as does a CO2 heat pump, for example, which is the central heat pump water heater example that is in the market now. But we also don't have very many products that are low GWP, so we have a less than full ball on product availability in that example. In addition to, because we looked at all potential technologies, we of course did look at solar thermal and electric resistance, which have places they belong, and solar thermal has a great long history, but per the most recent studies, there's definitely only certain applications, not as widely applicable, and it can have performance barriers, of course, and there are some emerging products. And on the emerging products, I'll draw your attention to a few columns down, the 120 volt system. We're very excited in the market that there's emerging products in 120 volt. This is the displacement for existing retrofits for the most part. It's a lower voltage, you don't have to upgrade the panel. And we are going to be looking at some field testing of units that are ready, and we anticipate them in the very near future, but they're shown here as not yet available because you can't go buy one yet. But we should be able to have that available in the market in the near future. Next slide. Cooking was a wonderful contribution from our contributing author, Richard Young from Frontier Energy. If any of you know anything about electric cooking, then you know Richard. And this is an example of all the technologies, both residential and commercial, that he helped score, that he did some writing to. And this is a great end use because there's so much readiness. There's just no barriers to a diversity of products that can electrify cooking in commercial and residential. And we know the barriers. We're going to speak to barriers shortly. But one of the things I'll point out, just as heating and space heating, water heating, space heating are all about heat pumps, cooking is primarily about induction cooktops, the hob induction tops. And this barrier is primarily about familiarity and comfort. Although electric resistance glass top cooktops do displace gas cooking, we don't, as an industry, necessarily want to promote those because they don't have a good experience for the person cooking. We've had a history where sometimes we introduce a technology that fails and then people have a pushback to their previous work. Residentially, we don't want people saying electric doesn't work for cooking, I hated it. So we want to encourage induction in all cases where we can afford it and where we can advocate for it in residential. Next slide.
So when it comes to laundry, we focused on clothes drying specifically because that directly displaces gas. We said the water heating side of laundry, which is usually where the energy associated with washing clothes mostly comes from or is associated with. We said that we covered that in the water heating technology specifically. So in terms of laundry, we're talking mostly about clothes drying here. As space heating was the story of heat pumps, so too in part is laundry. Heat pump dryers are an important technology. They use something like 1/3 of the energy of a conventional resistance dryer. Also condensing dryers, which are often seen in a combo washer dryer unit, or it's one appliance that does the washing and the drying. Those are they don't use heat pumps necessarily. They use condensation, but they are also not an electric resistance technology, so they're much more efficient than electric resistance. So you can see pretty good technology readiness for everything except the emerging ultrasonic dryer product. That's still a ways out, but everything else, it's ready. You can go get it. The big barriers technologically in terms of laundry are that it takes longer to dry clothes with a heat pump or a condensing dryer, and the units tend to be smaller. There's definitely an advantage in terms of the ability to set it and forget it. You put your clothes in, you push the button, you walk away, you come back and they're dry and done. But it does take longer and the units tend to be smaller. So there's room to be, there's plenty of opportunity here for electrification. There's probably also room for some technology changes or improvements, not necessarily to performance, that's always welcome, but to making the products bigger and more suited to the demands of or the desires of most American consumers. The other laundry technology we looked at is a bigger scale. This is like institutional laundry or commercial laundry. That's a CO2 laundry system that actually doesn't use detergent. It's a fundamentally different approach, and that has been technologically demonstrated. Still pretty low adoption, but that's an interesting and encouraging area. And I want to specifically thank Sean Armstrong from Redwood Energy for his contributions to the laundry section. Much appreciated for contributing his expertise here. Whoops, I'll go back one.
There we go. Yeah. This is just intended to, am I coming through? This is just intended to recognize that when we look at technologies, the primary focus of the BETR roadmap is by end use, but we do have, as Alexi's going to go into some impacts, we have a sort of a menu approach where you can look down a column of a sector and say, what are the choices out of that other matrix? A little easier to look at. And this, as I said, we were just in parallel finishing the report. This commercial kitchen there under small commercial actually belongs over under institutional, because as you can imagine, if you're higher ed, you might have frequently have a dorm-based student commercial kitchen, and so that would belong over under there. So this is the menu by sector. Go ahead, Alexi.
Look at all the things on that menu. There are so many electrification options that are ready to go, which is a really encouraging finding out of this work. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about a certain amount of the so what. There are many good reasons to electrify appliances and systems in buildings. One of them, of course, is the emissions impact. So we did some research into the energy and the greenhouse gas emission impacts that we think are reasonable to expect out of building electrification. The way we did that, we worked with EPRI to support this work, the Electric Power Research Institute. Did I get that right? We worked from the matrix and the graphical tool, the tag that I showed you a bit ago, or I discussed, and we leveraged some models that EPRI has to do building energy modeling, to model packages of electrification technologies. And then I'll show you some of the graphics that came out of that and some of the results. We did this, BETR is a California-focused study. So we did this in several California climate zones. You can see they're colored here. This covers most of the heavily populated parts of the state. So a great majority of the population of California is within these climate zones or in a climate zone very similar to them. And the three I'm going to talk about are roughly San Francisco, the up northern half or the broadly Sacramento area of the Central Valley, and Los Angeles as the current ones. We also, I should mention, we also did a couple of more extreme climates like the high mountains, maybe Tahoe as a representation, and eastern dry desert as well, just to see what the extremes look like. This was done for residential buildings. We didn't actually do small commercial, large commercial, or higher ed. That was due to some team bandwidth and modeling limitations that came up during the process. So we have what we're going to talk about today are the residential outcomes. Did those in BOPT using some building models that EPRI has, and then we did some post-processing looking at the carbon impacts. We used hourly factors from NREL's standard scenarios data set for year 2020 with a base case standard assumptions, nothing too crazy. Important to note when we're talking about these savings, this is focused on the technologies that are displacing gas. It's not the whole building, so we're not including things that didn't electrify, like plugs or lights. Those were already electrified. We're talking about the space heating, the water heating, the laundry, the cooking. So it's, what you see as a % savings or as a number is the savings from the electrification specifically. It's not exactly the same thing as whole building. So I mentioned we built these packages. There's a baseline with gas devices. There's a medium efficiency electrification case, like for example, an electric resistance dryer. And then a best case, high efficiency electrification. I should mention, in this, you'll see in the single family right here, electric resistance range. That's not a technology we recommend because of its performance aspects, but we did want to see what's the sort of relatively lower efficiency end, lower capital cost, lower efficiency. Even if you don't go as far as you could on electrification, what kind of impacts do you get out of that anyhow? So we've got baseline, better, best for single family, and you can see water heating. It's a heat pump water heater, either of what's off the shelf today, like the one I put into my basement a few months back, or CO2 water heater with a little higher efficiency, space heating, air source heat pumps, and so forth. For multifamily, pretty similar story. The equipment is similar, except you see a little bit different space heating equipment just because of how multifamily buildings tend to be built. So what does this tell us? We've put these charts together that tell us what kind of results you get. This is the result for a single family home in Sacramento. I'll show you a few of these, and I just wanted to run through what these actually mean. First off, you can see a site energy savings. Energy is in blue. So the baseline was a little over 15,000 kilowatt hours a year. That's a gas baseline. We translated it to kilowatt hours using just site energy, kBTUs to kilowatt hours, so that this is all in the same units, apples and apples, not oranges. So keep that in mind. It's a gas energy basis. But now you can see we save about 50% basic site energy from going to even just the medium case efficiency. And then you can see there are CO2 emission savings. That's in the light green. So the baseline, that axis is over on the right. That was about 6,000 pounds of CO2 per year associated with that gas baseline. And if you go all the way to the best case, the high efficiency, all electric case, you've cut that by 85% and you're down at about 1,000 pounds of CO2 per year. Even the medium case was 80% emission savings, or 79%. The last thing, as we compare some of these, I want to note that the axis changes between charts. So a home in Sacramento doesn't necessarily use the same amount of electricity as a home in San Francisco. The climate is different. So as you compare, just keep that in mind, that the bars may look at the same height, but you got to check the number to make sure you're not comparing apples and oranges. So in San Francisco, we see maybe about 50% energy just to the base case and near 80% emission savings, and even a little more for high efficiency. If you go to Los Angeles, the story is pretty similar, actually. And once again, when you go to Sacramento, it's not too far off. This table here shows the detailed numbers, but what I want to point out is that going from all gas to all electric, even the middle case, the emission savings are 70 to 85%. and more like 85 on the highest case in single family homes. The story is pretty similar in multifamily homes. You've got San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Sacramento. You can see those impacts are similar. You've got maybe 40 to 50% basic site energy savings to the mid case. And this tells us something about our power supply. The electricity is relatively clean, and as Cathy said, you can't get to a zero carbon outcome society-wide if you don't decarbonize buildings. Here's a clear way to see that. The all-electric buildings have very low electricity, or have very low emissions. These are all gas emissions, and as the electricity cleans up, this is going to shift down all the way down to zero. But the emissions from the gas baseline will never go to zero unless we take action on electrifying buildings. So once again, similar results here: 50 to 60% energy savings on the medium or the high efficiency, and 3/4 or even up to 90% emission savings in multifamily from going to the highest efficiency case.
Great, Alexi. We can't help ourselves. We just love the data. And this is the final slide on this section before our recommendation section. And this is just pointing out that we did the same thing rather than on a package. Of course, we did it on air source heat pumps, and on the right here for heat pump water heaters. So on a technology basis, what does that technology compared to a single technology baseline save? And again, you see, as Alexi pointed out, the energy reductions and emission reductions are impressive, particularly in the emissions when switching to dropping the gas baseline. And also noteworthy, I'll see if I have control again. Are you seeing my mouse, Alexi?
Yep, you have control.
Okay. So on the left here, we used for the air source heat pump comparison to a high AFUE efficiency condensing gas furnace. So we used a good baseline that's kind of the best in class there. And in water heating, we used a retrofit situation, what you would most typically find in an existing gas water heater. So baselines matter. There's a number of scenarios. We welcome your review of this data in the future. That takes us to our last section here. We want to leave time for questions. That's the roadmap. Excuse me for a sec. So going to roadmaps and recommendations, we want to look at the technologies, and that's the fourth part. I said we talked about the status, where the technology's at today, what are the barriers, and what do we recommend. So the way we approach this in BETR is to use a layered information. As I said, the full BETR study is over 80 pages with appendices. So you'll see both in the status, roadblocks, and recommendations this level of detail on a per technology basis. Really dig in, and yet we try and make it approachable with the bullet list, but it's very thorough approaching it this way. The second layer we do is to address things in the tables. That's analogous to the way that you saw the status with the bullet list, with the diagrams of the scoring. Here is what a table looks like in BETR in terms of recommendation. There's 3 to 5 recommendations that detail roadblocks. As you see up here, this is a water heating one. And then it has the recommendations. So that, and then the last way we approach layered information is to have something at a glance. So this is an example of the roadmap at a glance. And again, keeping in mind that what we're wanting to do here is say, what do we need to do to get this technology further into the market, accelerate its adoption, and advance its technological progress and market progress, transform the market to these technologies, because they're not the incumbents. You saw at the beginning, they have less than 10% penetration across the board, absolutely low. We've got to make that curve much steeper. So we put it into 3 channels. So we give the recommendations in the first layer of information by technology, then we give it by channels, because this is the places that our efficiency partners need to work at the technology level, at the market level, and at the program level. And then there's a series of recommendations that then characterize those, as you see in these small font but exemplary graphic, that bring those recommendations down to the technology level. And so that at the glance, you're able to start seeing things like the technologies that are really ready right now don't need anything in the technology gray area. They need market awareness. We talked about the barriers not being technical for these products. They need demand built up, supply chain support. They need the customer to feel confident. They need the contractor to feel that they can put these in and that the reliability of performance is there. Those are the barriers, not technical barriers to getting heat pump water heaters in the market today. Well, in parallel, down here, for example, with 120 volts, we are doing testing on this technology. So you can at a glance say, what are we doing now in these 5 years? And then as emerging products come in, what do we do next? I'm going to move along here. Alexi's going to give a little deeper, quick example on a pullout from one of those deeper tables on space heating.
Yeah, so going down a layer in this layered approach, or maybe it's up a layer, let's say we want to dig into one of these recommendations. For example, in space heating, we found there are some roadblocks related to industry support and industry education. So we're talking about at the midstream designers, installers, and builders. We say, what are the roadblocks? Well, we know there are existing building constraints around wiring and ducting and things like that. We know there are first cost issues. There are split incentives, which means the tenant pays the energy bills, but the owner pays for the capital upgrades, and never the twain shall meet. So we have to address that. We have, people concerned about having callbacks and maintenance concerns, right? You can see these on the left. Those are some of the roadblocks identified as what is stopping progress in this specific piece, in this midstream industry area. On the right is what do we need to do to address that? So we need to think about what are best practices for site assessment, make sure the industry knows when they go in, okay, I know what I'm looking at, I know what equipment I'm going to spec, I know what tools to use. We need to educate industry players so they know how to do this stuff, they know what resources to pull. They may be able to shift how they design things now to or spec things now to how they can do that going forward in an all electric manner. And then some performance materials, right? So we need to address concerns about maintenance callbacks and other issues, right? Do heat pumps deliver air that's warm enough for customers to really like? These things. So we've got specific roadblocks identified and specific recommendations to address those issues.
Right. I want to point out that in BETR, we do have feedback from manufacturers on space and water heating, thanks to some work that EPRI did in conjunction with Southern Cal Edison a year and a half ago. So we have the results of their impressions of what the best roadblocks, not the best, the roadblocks that are the biggest issues in their minds, and they're indicated by a supertext M in all of our notations, so we can see what we see in our industry and how they see things. Another example quickly is just commercial cooking. So we separate residential and commercial cooking, and here the roadblocks are, again, not technical, but they certainly have a lot to do with raising confidence in commercial cooks and owners of restaurants regarding the ability for the all-electric kitchen to meet the operational experience that cooks are expecting. And you see that we have design models. So there's technical solutions that may be like templates for different types of kitchens that put together the packages of all electric kitchen that can help them see the future when they're building a new restaurant. So finally, we do that by each end use: space heating, water heating, cooking, and laundry. And then we have a roll up, much as Panama did at the beginning with the California roadmap that he talked about. We have the 5 collective strategies because so many of the barriers and the recommendations are common across all technologies. So these 5 benefit the advancement of all electric technologies to build demand, support the supply chain, partner with production, close the cost gap, and align programs and policies. And we have a table that details each one of those 5 as well. And again, following a channel approach, which is a logic model kind of market transformation approach with technology, market, programs, and policies. What do we do in each of those channels to make this happen very quickly? So Alexi is going to bring takeaways home, and we'll be talking to you with your questions, I hope.
Yeah, so a couple of key takeaways. One, the energy and the CO2 or greenhouse gas emission savings are very compelling, and we cannot get there without thinking about building electrification. It's critical. We need to do this. Two, we can do this. Technology off the shelf, state of the shelf, and in some cases emerging very soon technology, but basically this stuff is ready. We can fully electrify buildings now with the technology we already have and products that are already available. There will be improvements coming, but this stuff's ready to go generally. Most of the roadblocks, the great majority of the roadblocks we identified are not technological. There are some, and there are certainly technology improvements to be made, but fundamentally the big roadblocks are about consumer demand, building demand for electrification products and technologies, supporting the supply chain up and down from the manufacturer down to the installer, partnering with various entities along the way, including production, making sure there's not a big cost barrier so that we don't have these equity concerns, and so that we don't have progress stymied by, but it costs too much, which is, that's a real concern. And we need to make sure, as Panama said at the beginning, that we've aligned these goals across our programs, utility programs and others, and across our policies. Now that we're ready, we know we have the need, we know how to do this, we know how to get there from here, so let's go, and the sooner the better. So I think we are ready to take 10 minutes for discussion and Q&A. If you haven't already, submit some comments or questions into the chat, and we'll discuss that. You see our email addresses on the screen there, so feel free to reach out. As Cathy mentioned earlier, this report is expected to be posted early in the coming year, so keep an eye on NBI's website for that.
Okay. And I don't know if Ashley, you want to take back control, or I'll switch to.
Let's leave it on there. So they got your guys' contact information. So if there's any, if they have any questions, they can contact you. Thank you so much, you guys. The report is looking great. I love the graphics, the information. It's a wonderful collection of market readiness, data analysis, road mapping, and strategy. It's just fantastic. I think it's everything we could have hoped for, and we have a whole bunch of questions and excitement. One of the first ones is, you mentioned a couple times that this was focused initially on California and certain climate zones within California. Are there plans for expansion to other climate zones in California and other regions? And how would interested parties that are listening in here work with you guys to expand it to, say, New York or the Southeast or other areas? Are there plans for that kind of expansion?
Thank you. That's a great question. And we wanted at first maybe to make it more national. The technologies are national and international. We have a section on international technologies. But when you start writing about the drivers and the policies and some of the, obviously the analysis, that has to have a regional or local approach. So it would be just a modification, if you will, to work with another region. We're doing some work on decarbonization with Panama and others in the Midwest. We work actively with New York. So if somebody wanted to work with us to modify the lion's share of what we did, which would still be applicable, and then customize it for their regional policies and their fuel distribution, then we would. We're a nonprofit, that's what we do. We're trying to, changing the market nationally helps everybody in every region. The manufacturers would love that too.
Great.
Give us a call.
Fantastic. Contact information right there. So some folks asked about the availability of this presentation. As said, if you're a member of the coalition, we will be posting this in the member section of the Building Decarbonization Coalition's website. So please feel free to find it there. A question about the early costs, the early 70% conversion thought. So given a target of 70% conversion by 2045, how does that impact gas costs on the remaining 30%? Is that a problem that really requires perhaps 100% conversion instead?
Well, Panama, in a lot of ways, you'd probably be as able to answer that question as anyone, but I will just quickly say that, you know, the cost equity of transforming our market to all electric is definitely on the radar, both politically and pragmatically at the utilities and at the state. And there's been some wonderful studies by E3, and we reference areas we don't cover like costs. We do give resources to go to look at the analysis on cost disparity or advantages. Do you want to say anything on that, Panama?
What I would say is tune in to our gas proceeding webinars, because absolutely,
Yeah.
you know, as we reduce ratepayers, reduce customers on the gas grid, we are going to have those fixed costs spread out over a smaller number of those ratepayers, and therefore bring about higher costs. And so it's going to become even more affordable to electrify as we electrify more. A question about the CO2 reductions for Alexi. Alexi, do the CO2 reductions that you guys discussed on the technology packages, do those include marginal emissions, so time of use variables?
What we did was looked at hourly emissions, or we took the hourly electric load profile for the electric cases, and then took average system level emissions factors. We did take a look at that with marginal. The differences are not enormous, but basically in this case, to figure out what is the difference looking like now, and what might they look like going forward, we determined that average makes more sense for this particular application, although there's certainly places where marginal makes more sense. So for the broad trends look, we used average, but we did go to the hourly level. And we did this with using one set of factors that are common to the whole state of California. I know there are lots of differences between one utility territory or another, but we wanted to be able to compare across the whole state and say, what's the difference in the climate zone, not necessarily what grid you're connected to or utility.
Great, thank you. A question here, it says, it seems like the incremental benefit from going from better to best is somewhat limited, but the barriers seem quite high between the two of those. Is that your finding as well? And if so, why go there?
I'm so glad to have that question. Thank you very much, whoever asked that. That's an important observation, that we don't need to wait by any means until we get that next increment, which is only 8 to 10%, as someone observed, of additional emissions. We do want those products in the pipeline. We do want to, where they're available, just go ahead and go to best practices, depending upon life cycle cost and other issues. But what I'm hearing sometimes is a tendency to say, oh, there's better refrigerants coming in the pipeline, so you know, maybe we should get those technologies. No, the mid level, the ones that are ready today, we've got to get those, you know, very much into the market right away. So that's it isn't a matter of not going to the best practices, because where possible, that's always just that, best practice. But we don't want to hesitate with the ones that fit in a cost effectiveness and/or in readiness by waiting for other things that are a little longer. These should have, the adoption rates should be curving upwards yesterday. So.
Great. People are really excited about this report. And so could you repeat one more time, Cathy, when it's going to be available and how folks are going to be able to get it? Then I got a couple more questions. Yeah.
I've got a big red bow here that I'm planning to wrap around it at Christmas and deliver it to the funders you saw. As I said, it's in graphical production, and so that takes another week or so. So I plan to deliver it to them before the end of the year, both the summary and the report, so we can make it publicly available at the beginning of the new year. And we'll give it to BDC on their site, and it'll be on our site.
Great. We'll definitely be announcing it.
Great. So, and we'll put a link. Yeah.
Can you comment? So a lot of this, and you guys did a great job of differentiating between kind of the global warming potential baselines we have right now for refrigerants versus going towards low GWP refrigerants. But can you comment about progress and availability of non-HFC refrigerants?
Yeah, I can comment on that. There are a couple of moving parts on that, or a couple of two big things I want to highlight. I'll start with water heaters. As Cathy said, the emission savings from going from a gas, or in many cases even electric resistance water heater, to a heat pump water heater with today's refrigerants, they're quite significant, and they already right now outweigh the incremental change from today's refrigerant to the new refrigerants that are coming, whether that's the mid GWP or something even all the way down like a CO2 refrigerant, which has a GWP of 1. So there are products available and we are tracking them. There's at least one unitary heat pump water heater and one central that's in testing right now that use CO2 as refrigerants. So that's coming and we should have that, but there's no reason not to put in heat pump water heaters right now, even if they are using conventional refrigerants. And then on space heating, in 2023, California is going to require most or a lot of vapor compression products, heat pumps, air conditioners, and et cetera, to switch to a lower GWP option, below GWP of 750, which means 750 times as bad as CO2 in terms of global warming potential. That's spurring manufacturers to work on developing new products to meet that. Most of those are still in the pipeline right now. But again, the message that I want to convey is there's no reason not to electrify right now, even if the product is going to be better in 3 years, because the impacts we're going to get in those 3 years are significant.
Yeah, and I want to say on hydrofluorocarbon elimination, it is also being worked on from many different entities from CARB on terms of, you know, there's leakage and there's the installation procedures, there's the sealing of the equipment, which has gotten so much better that during installation there isn't leakage as much. So there's a number of different paths being worked to make the refrigerant charge that still is needed in these advanced electric technologies to have as low impact as possible. So it isn't just the presence of a lower hydrofluorocarbon rating, it's also the practices in the technology production and in the installation and decommissioning that have a big impact on refrigerant leakage into the environment.
Absolutely. So as Cathy said, we're only seeing about 10% adoption rate, and we only had about 10% answer rate to all the questions that were asked. There were so many questions asked, but unfortunately we have run out of time. If you want to get those questions answered that you didn't get done, please write to Alexi or Cathy right here at this contact information. Alexi and Cathy, great job on the report. Fantastic presentation. Thank you guys so much for giving it today. And thank you everybody that joined us in the BDC community today for this webinar. And we hope to see you next week for our last webinar of the year. We're going to close the webinar. Thank you, everybody. Have a great holidays. Happy New Year. Here's to a better 2021 than 2020. See you all.
Nice. Thank you, BDC. Bye-bye.
Thank you.